embattled Congressman Matt Gaetz.
Matt Gaetz was one of the very few members in the entire Congress who bothered to stand up against permanent Washington on behalf of his constituents.
Matt Gaetz right now, he's a problem for the Democratic Party, and he can cause a lot of hiccups in passing of laws. So we're going to keep running those stories to keep hurting him.
If you stand for the flag and kneel in prayer, if you want to build America up and not burn her to the ground, then welcome, my fellow patriots. You are in the right place. This is the movement for you.
You ever watch this guy on television? It's like a machine. Matt Gaetz.
I'm a canceled man in some corners of the internet. Many days I'm a marked man in Congress, a wanted man by the deep state. They aren't really coming for me. They're coming for you. I'm just in the way.
Okay, we might not see a court proceeding until we are nearer and nearer to the 2024 GOP presidential race. I know you're a fan of both former President Trump and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. And though he's not officially said that he's running, there has been a lot of comparisons to the two men. He's now catching flack from Trump backers for seemingly taking a jab at Mr. Trump and all of the details surrounding this, some could say, lurid case. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, if I were governor of Florida, I would not allow any Floridian to be hauled before some Soros-backed prosecutor in some blue city over politics. And I wouldn't make an exception to not protect the president of the United States. Ron DeSantis should be standing in the breach to stop any sort of extradition of President Trump from the state of Florida. And the fact that he's not doing so puts every Floridian at risk who could be the subject of a false allegation. I know Ron DeSantis well, he's a friend, but he hasn't been the target of false and persistent allegations like President Trump has. And so I don't think he really understands the nature of this fight right now. I think that it was a bit uncouth for him to take a jab at the former president. And there's a role for the governor of Florida here, I think, to stand up for our state, for the rule of law, and to push back against the Sorosization of the criminal justice system.
Welcome back to Firebrand. We are live. The Sorosization of our criminal justice system is real. I'm going to get to what's going on with the new FBI headquarters that Nancy Pelosi has planned. We ought to block that as it relates to Washington, D.C. Big news regarding the accuser of Joe Biden and some of his activities when he was in the United States Senate. And, of course, we're going to get to the Trump trials. That was Governor Ron DeSantis's opening salvo, I guess, of attacks, taking a jab at the former president. And I think the governor could do a whole lot of positive work here for the people of Florida if he were to make it very clear that he is going to utilize his authority to make it very difficult for Alvin Bragg to Soros-ize Florida and our citizens and our residents. Thank you to everyone who's joining us today. We've got one of the more international audiences we've ever had, folks from American Samoa, Australia, Ireland, and then, of course, North Carolina, Texas, West Virginia, Ohio, New York, Kansas, here at home. The DeSantis thing is uncomfortable. It's weird. I know there are a lot of conservatives who look to Ron DeSantis as someone who's built out a legacy and a platform in Florida about how conservative governance can work for people, but at the same time, this jab at former President Trump, I think, has people wondering whether or not there are other forces influencing the governor's behavior as the chief executive of our state and as a political operator. And there was sharp criticism from Donald Trump Jr. on his Rumble show, Triggered. Take a listen.
I genuinely had hoped, because I want there to be a strong Republican bench for the future, okay? But I also understand how this works, right? People push other people to run. The consultant class does that because guess what? They only get paid if you run because they take a piece of the ad buy and the commercial buy and the this buy and the that buy and a piece of the fundraising dollars, and they all get rich. But they don't get rich if you don't run. So I had hoped that perhaps DeSantis' week-long silence, while even rhino never-Trumpers, people who hate Trump, even leftists, stepped up, was him waiting to perhaps make a big statement at his already scheduled press conference. But I was wrong. DeSantis thinks that Democrats weaponizing the law to indict Trump is a, quote, manufactured crisis? It isn't a real issue? Seriously? Has he been watching anything? To me, as I tweeted, it's pure weakness. Now we know, while he was silent all weekend and totally owned by Paul Ryan and Karl Rove and his donors, that's what it is, guys. He's owned by the billionaire donors. 100% controlled opposition. Let's see which way the wind is blowing. Let's see which way they want me to respond, and I will do it. So I was hoping for a strong response, but we got a milquetoast response.
And to those who are wondering what the basis is in law for DeSantis to be able to push back, I would cite Chapter 941 Florida statutes. This is the Extradition Act, and it requires the governor to essentially certify that another state is making an actual allegation of an actual crime. Here, we have seen Alvin Bragg, the Soros-backed Manhattan district attorney, really convert through a tortured legal analysis a misdemeanor into a felony. And so here we have this low-achieving, counterproductive Manhattan DA deciding to charge former President Trump, and the misdemeanor would have had a 2-year statute of limitations. But he's elevating it to a felony now to extend that statute of limitations. And there are a lot of people who believe that this would have been long ago forgotten if Donald Trump wasn't a candidate for the presidency again. And that is one of the things that makes this exercise so dangerous. In the rest of the world, America will lose credibility if it looks like our leaders just arrest their predecessors, their future potential rivals. And in this case, they are one and the same. There's a reason America has never gone down this road before, and it is not only dangerous within our country, but it is dangerous to America's standing in the world to pursue this. Alvin Bragg, in this case, has created a novel, untested legal theory that even most liberal attorneys would agree is nonsense. When President Trump is charged, I believe this indictment will be subject to an immediate motion to dismiss as a matter of law. So it's very hard to get indictments dismissed before evidence is introduced. But if you take the position that every fact laid out in the indictment is true, but as a matter of law, a charge would not stand, that would give the defense attorneys the opportunity to file that motion. And in this case, I believe it should be well received by the courts. Now, no American would ever face this charge if they were not President Trump. That is why it is such an abuse, a weaponization of the criminal justice system. Apparently, Alvin Bragg thinks that he can elevate the charge of falsifying business records to a felony because there may be some connection to campaign finance laws. Now, keep in mind, the Department of Justice rarely, if ever, prosecutes these types of matters, even if there's a technical violation of federal criminal law. And the DOJ, where Trump has very few allies and friends, explicitly declined any sort of criminal process against Trump on the very same facts. Alvin Bragg did not go out and develop some new set of facts to be able to go after Trump. To the contrary, you've got a circumstance here where the case was largely disregarded by DOJ, and now it's being revived as the consequence of an upcoming presidential political contest. And it's a political hit job done by a Soros DA. While campaigning on a platform to prosecute Trump explicitly and bragging the entire time about how he had sued Trump more than 100 times while working in the New York Attorney General's office, Alvin bragged he managed to attract the attention of a big donor. Over $1 million in Soros money helped elect Alvin Bragg. Over $1 million. He may be the most notorious of the so-called Soros DAs, and there's a network of them. We've been hearing about it all over the country. We even have some in Florida. They do things like refuse to prosecute violent crime while engaging in political targeting of conservatives. George Soros has spent over $40 million to elect 75 left-wing prosecutors over the last decade. Think about that. 1 in 5 Americans lives in an area controlled by the Soros prosecutorial tentacles. Soros has funded the campaigns of prosecutors in Seattle, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C. How's life going there with rising crime? But we've even seen it in the Virginia suburbs, counties in Mississippi and Wisconsin, Texas, Pennsylvania, Florida, Illinois. Too many to list. Now, it's hard to imagine that there's even a state out there who's escaped the reach of George Soros. Almost every major city in the United States has some connection between the criminal justice decisions made there and the local DA. There's a part of it that makes you almost admire Soros's efficient quest for power. Because while you see tens of millions of dollars spent on one U.S. Senate race, sometimes tens of millions of dollars spent on one seat in the United States Congress, we can't throw anybody in jail. The people who can decide whether to prosecute or not prosecute, whether to put the dangerous back into our communities, whether to go after political rivals, those people now have, as a principal benefactor in many cases and in many large cities, George Soros. Unbelievable. You'll recognize names such as George Gascon in Los Angeles, Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, Kim Foxx in Chicago. Even in Florida, Hillsborough County State Attorney Andrew Warren, whom DeSantis removed from office for intentionally abandoning his duties to enforce Florida law, has this Soros connection. Wow, isn't that something? Governor DeSantis was able to use his authority properly, I would argue, in the Andrew Warren matter. In the Trump matter, a little different. Now, Alvin Bragg has reduced the categorization of felonies in Manhattan by 52%. So in 52% of cases where there's an original charge of a felony, it gets reduced to a misdemeanor or an original arrest for a felony. Over half the time, if you get charged with a felony in the Alvin Bragg jurisdiction, you're looking at a downward departure. And under that rule, with reduced penalties, we've seen more armed robberies. We've seen a decision to no longer even prosecute resisting arrest. So think about that. If you're in Manhattan and you resist arrest from a police officer, you're not even going to get prosecuted for that, yet they want to go prosecute Trump for a non-disclosure payment 7 years ago. Alvin Bragg has virtually refused to enforce any criminal penalties for shoplifting at all. You want to know why you get so much street crime, so many businesses leaving New York, so many people feeling unsafe when walking around the streets? It's because there's really no enforcement or no penalties for shoplifting, and it degrades quality of life for people. Donald Trump making a non-disclosure payment didn't degrade anyone's quality of life in Manhattan. We've also seen Alvin Bragg join a lot of the other Soros DAs in vowing to eliminate pretrial detention in almost every case. So if you rob someone at gunpoint, you can check into the police station and check out the same day. That totally drains any deterrent value out of a system of arrest and prosecution and corrections. Some violent criminals, such as assault and robbery, have increased 22% since Alvin Bragg took office. So whether or not you get the message, the criminals have gotten the message. And his soft on crime policy has led to an explosion of violent crime, anarchy across New York City. Pharmacies, supermarkets, bodegas are having to lock their merchandise during business hours. But it hasn't been enough to keep citizens safe. Recently, Alvin Bragg went after a bodega owner, Jose Alba, for defending himself against a violent attacker who came behind the counter of his store and attempted to beat him to death. Jose managed to grab a knife and fend off the attacker, but Alvin Bragg decided to send him, the victim, to Rikers Island. I guess Alvin Bragg would rather have people die defending themselves from violent criminals, the very criminals that he refuses to lock up while he engages in a political persecution of President Trump. We got some new Reuters polling showing over half the country sees this as a political prosecution of Trump. That's something hard to get folks agreeing like that on just about anything these days. But even people who don't like Trump and disagree with Trump see that this is a political prosecution. Things are so bad in New York City that when career criminal William Roland was arrested for threatening a store worker with a knife, he received only a misdemeanor charge from Alvin Bragg. The judge was so appalled at this downward departure, he said that the defendant in the case should feel lucky because of Alvin Bragg's new policies. Alvin Bragg clearly isn't interested in enforcing the law except when it is the select enforcement of the law. Refusing to charge felonies and then elevating a misdemeanor to a felony speaks for itself, and it is no mystery what is going on here. My colleague on the Judiciary Committee and Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of Government, Jim Jordan, just co-authored a letter to Alvin Bragg demanding that he produce all communications between his office and the DOJ that refer to Donald Trump in any way. And we also want to know how their office is using federal funds, if at all. Jordan also demanded that Alvin Bragg schedule a transcribed interview before March 23rd with the Judiciary Committee, and you better believe I will be there and I will be asking questions. If they want to fight, they will get one, but we will follow the facts and the law, unlike Alvin Bragg. Now, Jordan's letter also lays out the problems with this purported case. Apparently, it relies heavily on testimony from Michael Cohen, who clearly has an axe to grind with the former president. It also mentions that this novel legal theory that Bragg relies on was rejected by the DOJ and only seemed to resurface when Trump announced his candidacy for the presidency again. Jim Jordan brings up an interesting point about special counsels as well. I want to delve into this. We may need a legislative fix to the special counsel statute if special counsel behavior has far exceeded the scope of their authority and if the process has run amok. Now, speaking of special counsels, this is not the first time a special counsel has wildly gone beyond their scope. You may remember the Ken Starr report, which was issued by special counsel Ken Starr in relation to Bill and Hillary Clinton's financial dealings with the Whitewater Land Company. Does this ring a bell? How about the Monica Lewinsky affair? Because what started out as an investigation into financial dealings and land became an impeachment for perjury, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and abuse of power. Ken Starr even investigated Bill Clinton over a lawsuit with Paula Jones. Similarly to Trump and Stormy Daniels, Bill Clinton paid almost $900,000 in hush money to Paula Jones, far less in the Trump matter. I don't recall any local prosecutor going after President Clinton for this. This type of persecution is reserved for conservatives and their voters. In any case, we may be able to get Bill Clinton to agree that the special counsel statute has actually been abused in some cases. And the double standard is outrageous. But speaking out and protesting isn't enough. We need to put a stop to this behavior and send a message to the Alvin Braggs of the world that they're not going to get away with it. Investigating and stopping these double standards is really important for what we do every day on the Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government, and we need to do our job to hold bad actors accountable and put a stop to this corruption once and for all. And just for a moment, I want to drill down into the federal nexus here, because the principal critique that we've heard of the Jordan letter that I just described is, well, there's not necessarily a federal nexus to Alvin Bragg charging the former president under state law. But I actually want to know how we went from Robert Mueller and the accusation that somehow Donald Trump was a Russian agent to the review of a non-disclosure agreement. How does one cause the other? Were there federal assets or agents or employees or contractors out there spurring along some state-based prosecution? Is that really what we want federal taxpayers funding? And I recognize Bill Clinton would probably have a beef with this as well. And so maybe there can be some bipartisan agreement that we need to constrain these special counsels, and they shouldn't germinate in a 5 years later state-based prosecution that was abandoned by the federal government anyway. But President Trump might not be the only person answering questions about prior conduct. There is news regarding Tara Reade. Now, as you may remember, Tara Reade is the former Senate staffer of then Senator Joe Biden, and she made allegations that he violently sexually assaulted her in the Capitol building while she was trying to physically resist him, that he did very terrible things to her. And so she put out a tweet recently that got some attention. Here's the tweet for those listening. "So I'm not a former porn star, nor did I receive hush money. I was a Senate staffer for Joe Biden when he sexually assaulted me in 1993. To date, no investigation, only media attacks and trolls aimed at me. I ask again to @MTGreen and @Matt Gaetz, when will Joe Biden be investigated? Thanks." Congresswoman Green saw this tweet and she felt as though we ought to get the answers. Now, no person's allegation should ever be taken at face value. There has to be review. There has to be corroboration. I took particular note in this matter that Tara Reade's mom had actually called into Larry King Live to talk about her daughter's experience as a staffer being sexually assaulted by a powerful man. That seemed to be some real-time acknowledgement that a bad thing had happened here. And so Congresswoman Green brought this to me. She brought it to the chair of the Oversight Committee, Jamie Comer, and Chairman Comer told Congresswoman Green that we would be fully authorized to bring in Tara Reade, to take her transcribed interview, to get the facts, and to understand what really happened with Joe Biden and this allegation of violent sexual assault against an employee, against a staff member. So Marjorie Taylor Greene tweets back, "Tara, thank you for bravely speaking out about such a horrible sexual assault you endured by your boss, then Senator Joe Biden, as a young staffer. It's time to take a stand against the two-tiered injustice system. @Rep Matt Gaetz and I would like to invite you to come to Washington to speak with us. We will be in touch very soon." So there you have it. There you have the news. Tara Reade will be coming in to give a transcribed interview. We will get the facts. That is the plan now. Oversight Chairman Jamie Comer has blessed this to Congresswoman Green directly, and that is why we are endeavoring to follow the facts. Isn't that a good thing? To actually look at the facts, evaluate the evidence, work to corroborate claims that are made, and ultimately attempt to achieve a just result. That is what we ought to do. There is other news that we want to be able to talk about today. This news about the FBI headquarters and the legislation that I have filed. So I've just introduced legislation, the FBI Washington Field Office House Arrest Act. This legislation only needs to be approved by the House, and it says that we should defund the shiny new FBI headquarters in the D.C. area. Now, Democrats funded this monstrosity with a dead hand during the lame duck legislative session of Congress last year. We should never forget that Senate Republicans helped Nancy Pelosi do this. They were right there the whole time, and the FBI was the beneficiary. Disgusting that Senate Republicans went along with it. Now, the previous rules under the Pelosi majority allowed for woke initiatives and programs to be bootstrapped onto omnibus spending bills, which fund other government programs that people support, like at the VA and at the Department of Defense for our pay for our military. And under Pelosi's direction and blessing, the House voted in one of those omnibus bills to allocate $375 million for a new FBI headquarters in the greater Washington, D.C. area. Keep in mind, the FBI employs less than 2.5% of the total manpower compared to the United States military. Yet the FBI, a domestic law enforcement entity, is set to receive a headquarters in the D.C. area larger than the Pentagon. This is insanity. With the FBI and other intelligence agencies under the scrutiny of the Weaponization of Government Subcommittee, I would argue that funding a new FBI headquarters at this moment is on par with the audacity of Congress to send hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine while our own country is in crisis. Are we going to build a $375 million FBI complex? Well, hey, you know what? Maybe we should build it in Ukraine. How about that? That can be their next gift from the United States, an FBI building. If my resolution passes with support from the Republican conference, we will know that we have the votes during the appropriations process to actually claw back the money from this proposed headquarters. It sets the stage for a big fight on appropriations and a clawback that would serve the American people well. There are still good men and women who work at the FBI. They have a task and a purpose to defend our country in many cases. But the FBI's weaponized Washington field office is rotten to the core. Through our investigations in the Weaponization Subcommittee, we have uncovered extremely disturbing testimony from FBI whistleblowers that the Washington field office is targeting Americans who oppose their corrupt political agenda. Doesn't happen everywhere. It is unique to Washington and probably New York. The Washington field office pressured agents elsewhere in America to cook the books on cases so it looked like there was more domestic violence extremism. They want to create the illusion that everyone is dangerous and extreme when actually we are mostly good people in this country. The Washington field office targeted anyone in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, even when they had no factual predicate or basis to do so. That is a fact. While Republicans are conducting serious investigations, the Democrats, unsurprisingly, are working overtime to derail our work and threaten our whistleblowers into hiding. That's why at the CPAC event in 2023, I called for Democrats to be removed from all future transcribed interviews within the subcommittee. Take a listen to my call for that action.
And so it is no longer time to go back to the old low-energy Paul Ryan, Trey Gowdy days of fake oversight. These are the Jim Jordan, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz days. And if the Democrats are going to obstruct our investigation, then I am calling to remove the Democrats from our investigation. They shouldn't be allowed to sit in the depositions and hear the evidence if they are going to use that to try to get in the way of thorough, rigorous oversight. And I don't believe that means hearings where we yell at people. I think that means a fundamental reshaping of this government, a reshaping of this town.
There is a lot of love on the live stream right now for deauthorizing, defunding a lot of these three-letter agencies that the American people believe have been weaponized against them. And I understand why the American people have that belief. When we have FBI whistleblowers telling us that the Washington field office is a den of snakes, it is not just Peter Strzok and Lisa Page and the Russia hoax gang. There are multiple components in the J. Edgar Hoover building teeming with partisan leftists who are actively undermining the FBI's true mission to solve crimes. The right answer is not to attack or dox whistleblowers like the Democrats did. The right answer is to put a freeze on FBI expansion and to do the hard work of rooting out the bad actors, getting to the bottom of the issue. That is what my legislation does and what my office and the subcommittee are doing every single day. I'd put the FBI on house arrest. I wouldn't build them a new DC-based house. Garrett O'Boyle is a whistleblower who inspires me. He is someone I mentioned in my remarks at CPAC. He's an Iraq war veteran who saw firsthand the malfeasance of the Washington field office. After serving in the military, after serving in law enforcement, he went to work for the FBI because he believed that they were the pinnacle of law enforcement in the world. Bottom line is that O'Boyle is one of a number of former FBI agents who have told Congress about how the Washington field office specifically uses bureaucratic tricks and bookkeeping maneuvers to make it look like domestic violence extremism was rising after the 2020 election. He testified that the abuse of this threat label was used as a basis to justify draconian actions against citizens for exercising their First Amendment rights. Americans shouldn't be tagged or treated differently because they support the Second Amendment or because they say build the wall or stop the steal. These aren't things that are criminal or illegal in any way. And if you don't like the speech, the answer isn't to weaponize the government against the people whose views you don't agree with. The answer is to speak back. That is the American way. That is what the First Amendment allows from all of us. But now when people exercise constitutionally protected speech, the government gets turned against them. But it gets worse. O'Boyle told his bosses that what they were doing was not appropriate, and they ignored him. After he was ignored by his supervisors, he reported this improper behavior to Congress using special whistleblower protections. The FBI was made aware that O'Boyle was sharing his complaints externally, and so they made him move across the country under the guise of recruitment to a different place. And when he arrived, they fired him. They held his family's belongings hostage, and they revoked his security clearances, making him unemployable. They kicked this patriot to the curb. If we don't hold them accountable, Christopher Wray and Merrick Garland never will. Many are not good people at the Washington field office. In fact, some might even say that there are some there who are evil. We hear it more and more every day from the disenfranchised patriots at the FBI. We've heard about the Washington field office breaking protocol and demanding that regional field offices gin up cases to target law-abiding gun owners, innocent pro-lifers. We've heard about the waste and fraud and abuse at the Washington field office. We even had an inspector general report that talked about the ways that the media in Washington and New York wine and dine Department of Justice, FBI officials. They give concert tickets, baseball tickets, and then they use them to pursue their goals, even if they're contrary to yours, to America's. The cancer at the Washington field office has metastasized so much that the entire body is in critical condition. Gifting the FBI a new headquarters larger than the Pentagon would condone, reinforce, and enable more nefarious behavior. It could get to levels that we've never seen before. It frankly already has when you look at what's occurring. The Republican members of the House of Representatives should join my effort to halt the funding for this pet project approved by Nancy Pelosi in the lame duck session of Congress. We've got a number of Republicans. Tim Burchett just joined the bill today. We've had Corey Mills on the bill. Harriet Hageman from Wyoming's on the bill. Dan Bishop. Dr. Gosar's on the bill. We got some really great members, and we're making the case. And so let your members of Congress know they need to be on the FBI house arrest bill. A few other things I want to talk about before we head out. Just breaking news now. DirecTV has made their deal with Newsmax. Newsmax will be back on MTV March 23rd. That's certainly something we're looking forward to. But hey, DirecTV, don't forget about OAN. One America News, just like Newsmax, was targeted by DirecTV, AT&T because of the content of their work, not because of their viewership. And I believe that is an abuse of market power, whether it happens to Newsmax or One America News. So I welcome this positive development as it relates to Newsmax, but I hope that it is a sign of momentum to get One America News back on DirecTV as well. I know the viewers would appreciate it. I've heard from a number of constituents about that matter as well. And there's a headline in today's Politico that touches on some of our discussions on Firebrand. It says, McCarthy's latest task, keeping the House GOP peace on war powers. And the work that we've done to try to reassert Congress's war powers authority is cited in the piece. So go check that out from Politico, how there are some neoconservatives in the Republican Party who don't want to have votes on war powers, who still think we should be in Iraq and Syria and Yemen and Niger and Somalia and Sudan, countries where America's interests, in some cases, is certainly poorly defined and which Americans are at jeopardy, not really for the protection of our country, but for the service of foreign interests abroad and special interests who want the military doing their bidding instead of the patriotic work that so many of our brave service members have signed up for. It's going to be a busy rest of the week here in Washington. Hope we're able to get another episode out to you, but we go live at different times just based on when we have votes and committee hearings. So the only way you will be notified in each circumstance of our programming is if you subscribe and have your notifications turned on. That means if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe and then hit that little bell. It's on Rumble as well, where we get a lot of viewership. And if you're listening on one of the great listening platforms, please give us that 5-star rating, leave a review or a comment regarding what you would like to see me discuss. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's keep fighting. Roll the credits.